So hello, if you're following this on Soul Tribe or on my YouTube channel, we're setting off on a contemplation of Sedna, the Inuit goddess, in the next few weeks. So I just wanted to share just a little bit of structure because Sedna is quite a different kind of body, a trans-Neptunian object. Um, some of you watching may never have looked at gene keys in relation to a goddess asteroid or a trans-Neptunian object in this case. And I'm just going to say a little bit about contemplation for the people here on Soul Tribe. And I'm also going to post in the tribe a little free introduction that Richard Rudd has to what contemplation is. And it's really important because when we drop from our mind and all this kind of knowledge and information, contemplation helps to drop it into the body and into the field of living wisdom. So it's a massive difference, and I can't explain it to you, but you feel it when it happens, and it doesn't feel overwhelming then. It doesn't feel like you're trying to get to know a goddess like Sedna outside yourself, because suddenly it becomes an inner living reality. And I hope to be your guide in that, that you will find that connection to the story. So I'm not going to go massively into the story this week. If you missed that, you can watch myself and Tina talked about all the juicy parts of the story last week. And so you can find that and look at those and really pay attention to which part of the story you feel the most resonant or dissonant with. And I've been going into the story since my late 30s, and it's interesting that I'm always dropping into a new part of the story, and there's a whole other story within the story, with the bit that I feel connected with. So in a minute, I'll share my contemplation. You'll see the part of the story I've kind of dropped into at the moment. So, contemplation, I always begin my contemplation with the intention that I'm going to contemplate, and contemplate suggests a kind of real slowing down and allowing something to unfold. And in that process, I might read the book chapter of my gene key. I might listen to the story of the goddess in question or the mythology. There's also audios that you can get from the gene key. So I'm making a conscious effort to connect into the frequency. And Richard Rudd, this is a transmission. So Richard Rudd himself, when you tune into his voice in the audio or the words in the book, they're going to open up a field of contemplation for you. But it's not about how much you can learn. And that's usually what is pretty overwhelming when people come into the gene keys and they're not too sure how it all works, and there's this massive book, and you could just get completely overwhelmed by it all. So contemplation is about like opening the self to find what is this resonant part of you right now that is open to healing, is open to this mythical understanding of your life. So often we can feel like these things going on for us are really personal and they're our personal failures. And if we only did, in our case, more yoga, we might be able to fix them. And then we hit things in life that we cannot fix. and that sends us deeper. So I feel it's a kind of good thing when we can't fix things quickly anyway, because it sends us on a deeper journey. And it's not about really about entering into your suffering more deeply, because when you're doing that, you're actually reactivating the field of victimization. So we don't really want to spend too long lingering in the soup of the shadow, but we do need to really grasp that it's from the shadow and our experience of it that the gift and the siddhi can arise. And it's funny, I've sometimes had the experience of hitting the shadow and the siddhi coming boom out of the shadow, like in a quite like transformative, painful, suffering moment, some like great epiphany has taken place, or and maybe you can relate to that as well. I can see some of you like, yeah, yeah, I get that. Um, so this thing about stepping into it gently, there's four pillars of the gene keys, which are gentleness, patience. I've forgotten them now. I'll get the other two in a moment. But yeah, contemplation is actually one of the pillars, and um, inquiry, that's the other one. Inquiry. So going in with curiosity and an open mind, and Um, yeah, that's a really that's been life-changing actually, just bringing in that one quality to everything of inquiry. What's going on rather than your mind kind of fixing on what it thinks is happening. Okay, so that's a bit on the process of contemplation. And if you came on a little bit later, I'm going to be posting in the tribe links to well, I'll post the first link, which is just the kind of 10-minute videos that Richard Rudd has done on contemplation. Because if you grasp contemplation, the pausing, and then there's a stage called pivoting, which is almost like that dropping into the DNA, the transformation within the body, within the cellular energy of the body. And really the key quality is the slowing down, patience, yeah, the gentleness. They're all equally important. So if you go at this hammer and tongs with your intellect and you wonder why you're not making any progress, then look at contemplation. And this is quite a new area, gene keys with goddess asteroids and trans-Neptunian bodies. So the gene keys themselves haven't really gone into this. Richard Rudd's done some interesting stuff on Chiron. I have heard him talk about Sedna actually in relation to the walrus when we were doing the dream arc. Um, so it's kind of a new area. So immediately going into it with inquiry, what is this about? I've probably been doing it longer than many people, this particular area, but I always enter as if I'm just beginning. And that feels like a really good place to begin at the beginning, always. Okay, so this week and next week, we're going to talk about Sedna. So today, could focus on the shadow, begin in the shadow, and then we're going to work through the gift and the siddhi, and we've got 2 weeks to do that in. And then it can be a much longer contemplation. Sedna is an interesting body because her orbit of the sun is like around 12,000 years. I don't think they know an exact orbit. So if you think of Pluto and the outer edges, um, and then you think of Sedna, this is a massive, massive orbit. Um, so for example, Danny and I, we're 4 years apart. We share the same gene key, and that will be quite common with Sedna. Whereas with other bodies, you would like maybe Pluto would be in the same sign of the zodiac, but probably not the same gene key, unless it was doing a retrograde between those years. So there'd be relatively few gene keys that we are going to be discussing. Um, so I'll just say a bit on the 27th gene key, which is where I have Sedna. Um, and the bit of the story I've fallen into is kind of interesting, I think, with this gene key. So this gene key leads from selfishness. Um, I've forgotten the gift actually, but and then it's selflessness is I think it's altruism. That's it, and then selflessness. Um, and for me, growing up as a female in quite a kind of gendered society, what I was always taught is that selflessness is about serving men, basically, serving the masculine. So it was just a really powerful message that was always there, that you strive to be a good girlfriend, a good wife, you do the cooking, you keep the house clean, and all of this is your selfless service. And so one of the things I've discovered over the years, and through hearing other people's contemplations of this gene key is our sense of what's selfless is quite warped. So we begin from this idea that actually our selfless giving may not be a Siddhic kind of selfless giving. It may be a conditioned way that we're used to relating to the world. And that actually, in my case, it feels like there's been a kind of drawing back and a purifying of understanding what selfless giving is all about, and actually realizing as well that when if I'm in a traumatized state and I'm triggered, that it's very difficult to actually give from a selfless place. It might even be impossible because the whole trauma response is very survival based. So it kind of draws you inward. I need to survive this moment. I need a strategy. Often that strategy as a female has been kind of pleasing the male in order that I might survive this moment, and be safe, and everything will go back to being normal again. So like a real fear of conflict actually in there as well. Um, yeah, so the bit of the story I've fallen into, I have talked quite a bit about this because it's been really fascinating layers, is has come about through an injury in my knee, and then my back went, and then last week my foot went. But actually today I'm in a really good space, and I went for quite a steep long walk yesterday, and touch wood, I'm okay. But there's been a lot of processing of this, and I've linked it into the Sedna story because Sedna goes off eventually. She's very resistant to getting married, but eventually she does. She's a very independent, strong woman. And then she seems to lose all her power. She ends up in this freezing cold nest. She's like a prisoner, basically. And and it kind of fascinates me at this point, like how did she end up there? Like, why couldn't she get away? Before this woman's hunting with husky dogs in this incredibly perilous environment. She's out on a kayak in ice, and hunting really dangerous animals. So why can't she get away from this man? And I'm not trying to get away from my man at all, actually. But I heard this like really interesting, like horrible story though, that a woman in the UK went for a walk with her boyfriend up a snowy mountain, and he was an experienced walker, and there was plenty of times they could have turned back, but he kept kind of pushing her, obviously completely overestimated her ability to do this and ended up having to leave her and go back for help. And she died of hypothermia. And the story has really hit my heart, because I can just imagine this woman following him up this mountain, knowing she couldn't do it, but being unable to say no and to keep going and having to trust in him, and then having been left alone and dying. I mean, it doesn't get worse, does it? I just so relate to her pain and how she must have felt, really. And that sense of betrayal, of the masculine not taking care of her. Um, yeah, and I think that's the bit of the story I've really been processing and coming to a place with my own partner of understanding our male-female conditioning and how it kind of needs to kind of come into going for a walk together and being inside that walk and enjoying that walk and taking care of each other in that walk. Um, and just to show it's not a gendered thing, actually, because I heard another story that of two people who did the same part of the Camino we did, and the guy actually had like a bit of an injury, and the woman just walked off every day without him and left him, hobbling along. And so they did the walk kind of separately. And so she was very focused on the outcome and the speed. And I need to get there really as quickly as possible, um, and get my certificate to say I've completed this. Um, so it's kind of a very mind sort of response in a way, I feel, to the whole thing. And maybe actually when I was in my 20s or 30s, I might have been more that sort of person that might do that, whereas now I'm much more of a relational person. So the take, yeah, but it could get codependent. So this is where I'm being careful. Like the taking care of the other in the walk is really important, but at the same time, honoring that there are times when I might need something a bit different, but for that to be really agreed and a conversation rather than a kind of act of oppressiveness. Um, yeah, so that's my contemplation, and to open the space to the others here to share. This conversation is taking place on Soul Tribe Online. I'll put the link, and you're very welcome to come along and join this and many other amazing things that we have on this platform. Okay, so